By the time my mother left the 12th voicemail, it was 2:47 inches the morning, and my phone was glowing so hard on the hotel nightstand it looked like an alarm I had forgotten to turn off. I was barefoot on a wooden deck over the Indian Ocean, my wedding dress lifting in the salt wind, my husband's hand still warm around mine. Back in Charleston, South Carolina, 200 guests were supposed to be finding their seats inside a whitewashed ballroom with climbing jasmine on the walls. Instead, they were standing in the parking lot, checking their watches, refreshing their phones, and wondering why the bride had vanished. My mother knew why. She just didn't think I would actually do it. 3 months earlier, she had looked me in the face and said, like she was proposing something generous, "You and Savannah can share the venue. It's one date, one ballroom, and if you split the 28,000, everybody wins." Everybody. That word stayed with me longer than the shouting did. Because in my family, everybody never really meant everybody. It meant my parents, my aunt, my cousin Savannah, and whatever version of peace they could buy with my silence. It never meant me. And when my fiancé Daniel said no, they acted like he was the problem. Not the forged assumptions. Not the backroom planning. Not the invitations drafted before I ever agreed. Not the fact that my wedding had somehow become a cost-saving solution for another woman's life. Just Daniel. "Your fiancé is making you difficult," my father said. No, Daniel was just the first man I had ever loved who didn't confuse obedience with kindness. If you understand quiet strength, you belong here. Subscribe. Power moves quietly. I'm telling you this now because what happened next did not begin with a cancelled reception. It began years earlier, with smaller things people love to call favors when they benefit from your sacrifice. My name is Caroline Mercer. I was 29 years old when my parents tried to hand my wedding day to my cousin like it was a family timeshare. And the worst part? That wasn't the moment I realized they were wrong. It was the moment I realized they had been doing it to me for years, and I had been smiling like it was love. It never starts with something as obvious as a wedding. It starts with things small enough that you don't question them. The first time my mother asked for money, I had just gotten my promotion at a mid-sized accounting firm in Charleston. I remember because I was still riding that fragile kind of pride, the kind that feels like it could disappear if you say it out loud too confidently. "Just a short-term thing," she said. "Your dad's truck needs repairs. We'll pay you back." It was $450. I didn't hesitate. That's how it always works in the beginning. The amount is small enough to feel harmless. The request is framed as temporary, and the relationship family does the rest of the convincing for you. A month later, it was $900 for a medical bill insurance didn't fully cover. Then $1,700 when my cousin Savannah needed help securing an apartment deposit because her income was fluctuating. It kept going. And every time I paused just a second too long, my mother followed the same pattern I would come to recognize like a script. First, the soft voice. "You're the only one I can count on." Then the silence. A day, sometimes 3. And then, like clockwork, my aunt would call. "Caroline, sweetheart," she'd say, her tone wrapped in concern that never quite reached her eyes, even through the phone. "Your mother is really hurt. She doesn't understand why you're pulling away." Pulling away. From wiring money, from solving problems that were never mine, from being the most reliable system they had ever built. I didn't have language for it then, so I called it helping. I told myself I was being a good daughter, a supportive cousin, a stable person in a family that had always been a little unpredictable. And if you've ever been the stable one, you know how quickly that turns into expectation. Not appreciation. Expectation. Some of you listening have lived this without naming it yet. The quiet transfers, the just this once, that somehow repeats. The way your value gets measured in how much you can absorb without complaining. If that's you, I want you to breathe for a second. You're not imagining it. And you're not wrong for feeling tired. By the end of that first year, I stopped keeping track in my head. So I started keeping track somewhere else. At the time, I told myself it was just habit. I work with numbers. I organize things. I document patterns. That's all it was. At least, that's what I believed when I opened that spreadsheet for the first time. I didn't know I was building the only version of my life where the truth would actually be recorded. I didn't open that spreadsheet because I was angry. I opened it because I was starting to forget. Not the amounts I remembered those, but the feeling around them. Each time I sent money, there was a moment right before I hit transfer where something in me hesitated. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet pause. Like my body was asking a question my mind kept overriding. So I created columns. Date, amount, reason, who asked, and a small notes section where I pasted screenshots when I had them. The first few entries looked harmless. Truck repair $450, medical bill $900, Savannah apartment deposit $1,700. Clean, organized, just numbers. But as the months went on, something shifted. The entries got closer together. The reasons got thinner, and the tone of the messages I copied into that notes column started changing. Need this as soon as possible. Don't overthink it. We're family, Caroline. That last one showed up more than any other. We're family. It's amazing how often that phrase appears right before someone asks you to give more than you're comfortable with. Savannah, my cousin, was always at the center of it somehow. She's a year younger than me, bright, social, effortlessly charming in a way I never learned how to be. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and be remembered without trying. Our family adored that about her. They called it presence. They called me reliable. At Thanksgiving one year, my aunt raised her glass and said, "Savannah just has this spark. Not everyone does, and that's okay." She smiled at me when she said it. I smiled back, because that's what I had been trained to do: absorb, adjust, and make it easy for everyone else to stay comfortable. That same night, I paid for the entire dinner. Venue, catering, wine. $2,800. My mother hugged my aunt goodbye at the door and said, "You outdid yourself tonight." No one corrected her. I added it to the spreadsheet when I got home. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being useful but not seen. And if you've lived it, you know it doesn't hit all at once. It builds quietly, layer by layer, until one day, someone outside your family notices something you've been trying not to name. That someone, for me, was Daniel. We had been dating just under a year when it happened. We were driving back from that Thanksgiving dinner, the radio low, the city lights stretching across the windshield. He reached over, turned the volume down even further, and said gently, "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Did anyone thank you tonight?" I didn't answer right away. Because I had noticed. I just hadn't allowed myself to care. But Daniel did something no one else had ever done. He didn't let me dismiss it. And that was the beginning of everything changing. I tried to brush it off. "I mean, it's fine," I said, staring out the window like the passing streetlights were more interesting than the question. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't correct me. He just let the silence sit there long enough for the truth to get uncomfortable. "That didn't feel fine," he said finally. Not accusatory, not dramatic, just accurate. And that was the first time I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit. People inside my family had trained me to ignore my own discomfort, but someone outside of it could see it immediately. That difference stayed with me. Over the next few months, Daniel didn't try to fix anything. He didn't tell me to cut anyone off or confront my parents or demand repayment. He just asked questions. Simple ones. Do you want to send that money? Or do you feel like you have to? Would they do the same for you? Have they ever? Those questions didn't feel like pressure. They felt like mirrors. And I didn't always like what I saw in them. Because the answers were complicated. I loved my parents. That part was never in question. But love, I was starting to understand, had been used as a kind of currency in our family. Something you proved through what you gave, what you tolerated, what you didn't say out loud. And I had been very good at proving it. By the time October came around, Daniel proposed. It wasn't extravagant. No crowd, no staged moment. Just a quiet overlook outside the city, a thermos of tea, and him kneeling on uneven ground like he didn't care if it was perfect, only that it was real. "Caroline," he said, voice steady, "you're the first person I've ever met who doesn't ask to be chosen. You just are. And I want to choose you anyway. Every day." I said yes before he finished. Because for the first time in my life, love didn't feel like something I had to earn. It felt like something I was allowed to receive. We started planning the wedding a few weeks later. Charleston had this venue I'd always quietly loved, Riverside Magnolia Hall. White columns, old oak trees draped in Spanish moss, soft evening light that made everything look like it belonged in a memory. The full package was $28,000. It was the largest amount of money I had ever spent on myself. And I didn't ask anyone for permission. That part mattered more than I realized at the time. When I told my parents, my mom smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said, "that's ambitious." My father asked one question: "How many people can it hold?" Savannah commented on my engagement post that night. "Cute." Just one word. And somehow, that told me everything about how this was going to go. I just didn't know yet how far they were willing to take it, or how far I would have to go to finally stop them. The first sign that something was wrong didn't come from my parents. It came from an email. Daniel and I had created a shared inbox for wedding planning vendors, contracts, guest lists, everything in one place so nothing slipped through. One Tuesday evening in March, he was scrolling through confirmations when he went quiet. Not confused. Not annoyed. Just still. "Caroline," he said, turning the laptop toward me. "Can you read this?" It was from our venue coordinator, Melissa Grant. Her tone was careful, professional in that way that tells you something isn't right. "Hi, Caroline. I received a message from someone identifying themselves as your family representative, requesting to modify your booking to include a shared ceremony. I wanted to confirm directly with you before proceeding. Please see the forwarded message below." My stomach dropped before I even scrolled, because I already knew who it was. "Dear Melissa, I'm Caroline's mother, and I'll be helping coordinate family logistics. We'd like to adjust the June 14th booking to include a joint wedding for Caroline and her cousin Savannah. Caroline has agreed to share the venue and split costs. Please send an updated quote at your earliest convenience. Thank you." I read it twice. Then a third time. "Caroline has agreed." I hadn't. No one had called me. No one had asked. No one had even hinted that this was a conversation happening behind my back. They had just decided. My hands were shaking when I picked up my phone. My mom answered on the second ring, like she'd been expecting it. "Oh, good. You saw the email," she said lightly. "I was going to call you tonight." "You told them I agreed," I said. A pause. Not long. Then, "Well, you will. It makes sense, sweetheart. Savannah just got engaged, and this way you both save money. 28,000 is ridiculous for one day." One day. That's what she reduced it to. Not a boundary, not a milestone, not something personal. Just a number to optimize. "I never said yes," I repeated. "You're being difficult," she said, her voice tightening just enough to signal the shift. "Family shares. You've always understood that." There it was. Not a request. A reminder of the role I had been playing for years. I felt something settle in my chest right then. Not anger. Not even sadness. Clarity. Because for the first time, I wasn't confused about what was happening. They weren't asking me to share my wedding. They were informing me that my wedding didn't fully belong to me. And that, somehow, I was expected to accept it quietly. I hung up before she could keep talking. Daniel was watching me, not pushing, just present. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Because for once, I wasn't thinking about what would keep the peace. I was thinking about something I had never seriously considered before. What it would look like to choose myself. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the argument, but because something deeper had shifted, and I couldn't unsee it. I sat at the kitchen table long after Daniel went to bed, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tapping of my fingers against the laptop. And then I opened the spreadsheet, not casually this time, not to log a new entry, but to finally look at it as a whole. Years of numbers stared back at me. Transfers I had made without thinking twice, payments I had justified. Mom's dental work, $1,200. Dad's credit card bridge, $2,400. Savannah's rent gap, $3,100. Holiday dinners, birthdays, emergencies. Line after line. I scrolled and scrolled. And then I did something I hadn't done before. I totaled everything. Not monthly, not yearly, everything. The number sat at the bottom of the screen, bold, undeniable. $76,920. I stared at it like it might change if I blinked hard enough. It didn't. So I added another column. Money my family had spent on me. I left it blank for a second. Then I typed $0. It wasn't even the number that hurt. It was what it represented. Years of giving, and not a single moment where anyone had paused to ask if I needed something in return. Not even something small. Not even a thank you that meant anything. I heard footsteps behind me. Daniel didn't say anything when he sat down next to me. He just looked at the screen. Then at me. "What are you feeling?" he asked. That question again. Not what I should do. Not what would make things easier. What I felt. I think. I swallowed, my throat tight. I think I've been disappearing for a long time. He didn't rush to respond. He just nodded once, like he understood more than I had explained. "You don't have to anymore," he said quietly. That sentence landed somewhere deep, because for the first time it didn't feel like advice. It felt like permission. Some of you listening know exactly what that moment feels like. When the story you've been telling yourself "they need me," it's not that bad. This is just how family work starts to crack. And something underneath it says, "No, this isn't right." If you've ever sat with that realization in the middle of the night, I want you to know you're not alone. And you're not wrong for seeing it. That morning, I made 3 decisions. I didn't announce them. I didn't argue them. I just acted. First, I called Melissa, the venue coordinator, and confirmed no changes had been made. They hadn't, because she had done something my own family didn't. She checked with me. Second, I asked about the cancellation policy. 8 weeks' notice meant a partial refund. We were still within the window. And third, I opened a tab I had bookmarked months earlier. A place I had only allowed myself to look at in passing. Somewhere far enough away that no one could reach me. For the first time, it didn't feel like a fantasy. It felt like a possibility. I didn't tell my parents what I was planning, not because I was trying to hurt them, but because for the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. Not every decision requires their input. That realization felt strange at first, almost like I was doing something wrong. But the longer I sat with it, the more it felt like breathing without permission. That same afternoon, I called the venue back. Melissa answered on the second ring. "Hi, Caroline," she said warmly. "I've been meaning to follow up." "I need to cancel the booking," I said. There was a pause. Not judgmental, just careful. "Are you sure?" she asked. "You're still within the refund window." "I'm sure." She didn't ask for an explanation. She didn't say anything about family or compromise or how big weddings are emotional and complicated. She just said, "Okay, I'll process that today." And just like that, it was gone. The ballroom. The guest list. The version of my wedding my family had already started building without me. Gone. We would receive 80% of our deposit back. $11,200. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, staring at nothing. I expected to feel panic, or regret, or at least hesitation. Instead, I felt quiet. Not empty. Not numb. Just still. Like a room after someone finally turns off a loud machine you didn't realize had been running the entire time. Then I made the second call. The one that had lived in the back of my mind for months. A resort in the Maldives. Overwater villas. Private beach ceremonies. Small, simple, intentional. The woman on the phone spoke gently, like she was used to people calling with something fragile in their voice. "We do a 2-person ceremony package," she explained. "Sunset, officiant, photography, private dinner." "How soon?" I asked. She paused. "June 14th is available." The same date. I closed my eyes. Book it. By the time I hung up, everything had shifted. Flights. Accommodation. Ceremony. All confirmed within a few hours. Daniel didn't ask for details when I called him. He just said, "Tell me what time we leave." That was it. No hesitation. No questions about whether this would upset my parents. No attempt to negotiate something smaller or safer. Just alignment. And if you've ever had someone stand next to you like that, not in front, not behind, you know how powerful that feels. Tell me where you're listening from, because I know this isn't just my story. Some of you are hearing pieces of your own life in this, the part where you start making decisions quietly, not to rebel, not to prove a point, but because you finally understand that protecting your peace doesn't require an announcement. It just requires action. 5 days later, I found out how far ahead my family had already gone, and how little they ever planned to include me in the truth. I found out by accident, not from my parents, not from my aunt, and definitely not from Savannah. A coworker tagged me in an Instagram story during lunch. "Wait, is this your wedding?" I clicked it without thinking, and there it was. A professionally photographed invitation cream cardstock, gold lettering, soft floral border, Elegant. Expensive. Already printed. Caroline and Daniel. Savannah and Lucas. Together invite you to a shared celebration of love. June 14th, Riverside Magnolia Hall. My name. On something I had never approved. My chest went tight, not like panic, but like something locking into place. Because this wasn't a suggestion anymore. It wasn't even a conversation. It was a completed plan. I scrolled. Savannah had posted it on her page too. 2 brides, 1 perfect day. Comments were flooding in. This is so unique. Obsessed with this idea. Goals, honestly. Over 120 people had already liked it, which meant one thing. Invitations had been sent. Printed. Mailed. People were holding them in their hands right now, believing I had agreed to something I had never even been asked about. I called Daniel. They printed invitations, I said. There was a pause. Not confusion. Recognition. They did that before asking you, he said calmly. Yes. Another pause. Then, that tells you everything. He was right. In their version of reality, my consent wasn't something they needed. It was something they assumed, owned, pre-decided. I checked my email again. The cancellation confirmation from Melissa sat there quietly in my inbox. March 14th, 10:12 a.m. The venue was no longer ours. There was no ballroom, no catering, no event, just an illusion my family was still building on, and they had no idea. I didn't tell them. Not yet. Not because I wanted to trap them, but because for once, I wasn't rushing to fix something they created. I let the silence sit. I let the clock move. I let them continue forward in a reality that didn't exist anymore. That was new for me. Not stepping in. Not correcting. Not rescuing. Just allowing. Some of you know how hard that is. When you've been the one who always smooths things over. Who always steps in before things fall apart. Who always makes sure no one is uncomfortable even if it costs you everything. Choosing not to intervene feels wrong at first. Like you're being careless or cruel. But sometimes, it's the first honest thing you've done in years. 3 days later, I saw my mother in person, and she acted like nothing had changed, which somehow hurt more than anything else. The dress fitting was my mother's idea. Something nice, she had said. A moment for the girls. Like this was all still normal. The boutique sat on a quiet street downtown, soft lighting, pale carpets, mirrors that made everything look a little more polished than it really was. When I walked in, they were already there. My mother, my aunt, Savannah, and 2 other relatives who always seemed to appear when there was something to witness. Savannah went first. Of course she did. 4 dresses. Each one met with the same chorus. Oh my God. That's stunning. That's the one. Phones came out. Angles were discussed. My aunt dabbed at her eyes like she was watching something sacred unfold. Savannah spun in front of the mirror, smiling like the room belonged to her. And maybe it always had. When it was my turn, my mother barely looked up. Just pick something simple, Caroline, she said. You're not really the dramatic type. Not dramatic. Not the center. Not the one people gather around. I stepped onto the platform anyway. The dress was clean. Classic. Nothing wrong with it. But the room went quiet. No gasps. No phones. My aunt checked her bracelet. Savannah tilted her head slightly and said, in a tone so casual it almost disappeared, "Do you want me to take a picture for you?" I smiled. Sure. She took one. Bad lighting. Cropped wrong. Half her shoulder in the frame. That was my moment. I stepped down, nodded politely, and said it was fine. Because that's what I had always done. Accepted less. Minimized myself. Adjusted the expectation instead of questioning the behavior. In the bathroom, I locked the stall and sat down on the closed lid. For a second, I just stared at the floor. Not crying. Not yet. Just still. Then I texted Daniel, "I'm okay, just counting down the days." He replied almost immediately. Then that dress is going to have the best day of its life somewhere else. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Because he understood. Without needing the full explanation, without me having to translate what just happened into something logical, he just got it. When you've lived long enough being unseen, recognition hits differently. It doesn't feel loud. It feels steady. I washed my hands, fixed my face, and walked back out. Smiled. Hugged my mother goodbye. played the role one more time. But something had changed. Because this time, I knew it was a performance. And more importantly, I knew it was temporary. Stay. Strength grows here. Because what came next wasn't louder. It was quieter. And that's what made it final. 3 days after the fitting, my phone rang with a name I didn't expect. Grandma Elise. She almost never called. Not because she didn't care, but because when she did, it meant something mattered enough to say out loud. I stepped outside to take it, the late afternoon sun warm against my shoulders. "Caroline, sweetheart," she said, her voice thin but steady. "I got a very pretty invitation in the mail." My chest tightened. "I see your name," she continued, "and Savannah's name right next to it." A pause. Not rushed. Not loaded. Just space. "I want to ask you one thing," she said. "Okay," I whispered. "Are you happy about it?" I closed my eyes. Because in 29 years, through every holiday, every check I wrote, every moment I smiled when something didn't feel right, no one had ever asked me that. Not my mother. Not my father. Not my aunt. Not Savannah. No one. And suddenly, I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because the truth had nowhere to hide anymore. "Grandma," my voice caught. "No one asked me that." Silence. Then a soft exhale on the other end. "I thought so," she said gently. She didn't sound surprised. Just certain. "I raised your mother," she continued, "and her sister. I know how they think. They worry about appearances, about keeping things smooth. But a wedding isn't something you smooth out for other people." Her voice softened even more. "It's yours." That word landed somewhere deep. Yours. Not shared. Not negotiated. Not optimized. Yours. I leaned against the railing, gripping my phone a little tighter. "I'll be okay," I said quietly. "I know you will," she replied. "You always find your way back to yourself." We stayed on the line for a few seconds after that. No pressure to fill the silence. No advice. Just presence. And when we hung up, I stood there longer than I meant to, letting that one question echo in my chest. Are you happy? It sounds simple. But for some of us, it's the hardest question in the world. Because we've spent so long being what everyone else needs, we forget we're allowed to answer it honestly. If you know what it's like to be the one who keeps everything together, you recognize that moment. The first time someone asks about you, not what you can do, not what you can fix, not what you can give, just you. That night, I didn't open my spreadsheet. I didn't check emails. I didn't replay conversations. I just sat with that question. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself answer it truthfully. After that call with my grandmother, something in me stopped negotiating. Not out loud, not in a way anyone else could see yet. But internally, the bargaining ended. I didn't rehearse conversations in my head anymore. I didn't draft explanations I knew would never be heard. I didn't try to find the version of myself that would make this acceptable to them, because there wasn't one. The next week, the pressure escalated. My mom started calling every day again, morning, afternoon, late at night. If I didn't answer, she left voicemails that sounded less like concern and more like urgency wrapped in disappointment. "Caroline, we need to finalize the seating chart. You're making this harder than it needs to be. People are already flying in. You can't just back out now." Back out, like I had ever stepped in. My dad didn't call as often, but when he did, his tone carried that quiet authority he'd always relied on. "This isn't just about you," he said once. "There are other people involved." I almost laughed at that, because that had always been the problem. There were always other people involved when it came to my decisions. My money, my time, my life. Just never me. My aunt sent a long email 2 days later. Subject line, "Family comes first." 3 paragraphs of carefully worded disappointment. Talk about unity, about sacrifice, about how my grandmother wouldn't understand conflict at her age. They used her name like leverage. And that did something unexpected inside me. It didn't make me fold. It made everything clearer. Because I had just spoken to her. I had heard her voice. I knew what she actually believed. And it wasn't any of this. Savannah messaged me too. Light, casual. Like nothing was wrong. "Hey, I'm finalizing decor ideas. I'll handle florals since you're not really into that stuff, lol. You'll love it." I stared at that message longer than I should have. Not because it was surprising, But because it was so consistent, she wasn't trying to hurt me. She just genuinely didn't see me as someone whose opinion needed to be included. That realization was quieter than anger. And heavier. I screenshotted everything. The calls, the emails, the messages. Not for revenge. Not even for confrontation. Just to have it. A record of what was actually happening. Because I had spent too many years questioning my own memory. Rewriting events to make them softer, more reasonable, easier to carry. This time, I wasn't doing that. This time, I let things be exactly what they were. That Sunday night, my mom called again. I answered. "Caroline," she said immediately, relief flooding her voice like she had been waiting for me to give in. "I'm glad you picked up. We need to talk about." "I understand what you want," I said calmly. A pause. Then, sharper. "Then why are you making this so difficult?" I looked out the window, the city quiet, the reflection of myself faint in the glass. "I'm not," I said, and for the first time I meant it. Because difficulty only exists when you're trying to force something that doesn't fit. I wasn't forcing anything anymore. I had already made my decision. They just didn't know it yet. April arrived quietly, but everything around me felt louder. Not in volume. In pressure. Group chats lit up with updates I never asked for: linen colors, floral samples, seating arrangements that placed Savannah and Lucas front and center, while Daniel and I appeared like an afterthought tucked into the corner of someone else's event. My name was still there. Just smaller. Less intentional. Like it only needed to exist enough to make everything look legitimate. I responded when necessary. Short, neutral, non-committal. Looks good. Either works. Up to you. Not because I agreed, but because I was done arguing with people who had already decided I would. Daniel noticed the shift. "You're not engaging anymore," he said one evening, watching me scroll through a thread I had no intention of answering. "I used to think, if I explained it the right way, they'd understand," I said. "And now?" "Now I think they understand perfectly. They just don't care." He didn't say anything after that. He didn't need to. Because once you see that clearly, there's nothing left to debate. Behind the scenes, everything for the Maldives was falling into place. Flights confirmed. Passports ready. The small ceremony details finalized in quiet emails that felt respectful. No assumptions. No pressure. Every message ended the same way. "Let us know what you prefer." Prefer. That word still felt unfamiliar. Like something I was learning how to hold without dropping. I ordered my dress online. Not the one from the boutique. That one belonged to a version of me that was still trying to fit into a room that never made space for her. This one was different. Soft chiffon. Light. Made for bare feet and wind instead of polished floors and expectations. When it arrived, I tried it on alone. No audience. No commentary. No one measuring how I looked against someone else. Just me. And for the first time, I didn't adjust anything. I didn't ask, "Is this enough?" I asked, "Do I feel like myself in this?" The answer came quickly. Yes. I folded it carefully and placed it back in the box, not as a secret, but as something private, something that didn't need to be shared to be real. That weekend, we had dinner at my aunt's house, 12 people at the table. Voices overlapping, laughter that felt just a little too rehearsed. My aunt raised her glass halfway through the meal. "To our two beautiful brides," she said. Everyone smiled. Savannah reached for Lucas's hand. My mother looked at me expectantly. "Caroline," she said, "do you want to say something?" All eyes turned. I felt it, the familiar pull to perform, to smooth, to say something that would make everyone comfortable again. I let 1 second pass, then another. "I'm just grateful everyone's here," I said. True, but not the whole truth. And for once, I didn't feel the need to offer more. Savannah stood up right after, pulling out her tablet. "I made a mood board," she said brightly. She flipped through slides, florals, lighting, seating charts. Her name bold. Centered. Repeated. Mine appeared once. Small. Near the bottom. No one mentioned it. Daniel's knee pressed lightly against mine under the table. Grounding. Present. On the drive home, neither of us spoke for a while. Then he said, quietly, "You're disappearing in your own wedding." I looked straight ahead. "I know." And this time, there was no confusion in my voice. Just recognition. And the steady, irreversible understanding that I wasn't going to let that happen. May felt like living two lives at the same time. In one version, the one my family could see, I showed up when expected. I answered messages just enough to avoid questions. I nodded through conversations about centerpieces and timelines, letting Savannah take the lead like she already owned the day. Everything I said was measured, careful, neutral, not a lie, but not the truth either. In the other version, the real one, Daniel and I were building something entirely different, quietly, intentionally, without an audience. Our flights were set. Charleston to Dubai, Dubai to Malé. June 12th. 2 days before the date printed on those invitations. The resort sent over final confirmations. A small ceremony at sunset. An officiant. A photographer. A private dinner on the beach after. Total cost, $9,800. Less than half of what I had already spent trying to create something that never felt like mine. And somehow, it meant more. Not because it was smaller, but because it was honest. Every detail required a choice, and every choice came back to the same question: what do you want? I was still getting used to answering that. Sometimes I hesitated, not because I didn't know, but because no one had asked me often enough for it to feel natural. One afternoon, Daniel found me staring at the confirmation email longer than necessary. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, then paused. It just feels strange, doing something this big without telling them. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely. "Does it feel wrong?" he asked. I thought about it. About the calls, the assumptions, the invitations printed without me, the years of giving without being asked what I needed. "No," I said finally. "It just feels new." He nodded. New doesn't mean wrong. That stayed with me, because I had spent so long confusing the two. That week, I messaged a small group of close friends, not family, people who had shown up consistently, without conditions. I kept it simple. Plans have changed. I'll tell you everything soon. No one pushed. No one demanded details. They just replied with things like, "Whatever you need. We've got you. Can't wait to hear." Support without pressure. It felt different, lighter. And then there was the spreadsheet. I hadn't touched it in weeks, not because it didn't matter anymore, but because I didn't need it the same way. It had done its job. It had shown me the truth. Now I was living differently because of it. That distinction mattered. One night I opened it again, scrolled through the entries, not with anger, not with regret, just awareness. Every number was still there. Every transfer. Every moment I chose them over myself. But for the first time, I didn't feel trapped by it. Because I wasn't adding to it anymore. I closed the file. Not as an ending, but as a boundary. June 12th was coming. And for once in my life, I wasn't waiting to see what my family would decide for me. I already knew where I was going. They just didn't know I wouldn't be there. June 14th arrived in Charleston like any other summer wedding day. Warm air, clear sky, that soft golden light people pray for when they plan months in advance. By 3:30 inches the afternoon, guests were already pulling into the gravel lot at Riverside Magnolia Hall. Women in pastel dresses, men adjusting their jackets in the humidity. Laughter carrying across the lawn like everything was unfolding exactly as expected. My mother was there early. Of course she was. Moving quickly, directing people, smiling just a little too tightly. Savannah was inside. Hair done, makeup perfect, dress pressed and waiting for its moment. She had every reason to believe this was still happening, because no one had told her otherwise. At 3:45, the first few guests started asking questions. "Where's Caroline? Is the ceremony starting at 4? My mom reassured them. "Just a small delay," she said. "You know how brides are." At 4, the doors were still closed. No music. No coordinator greeting guests. No staff setting up. Just waiting. By 4:10, the tone shifted. Phones came out. People checked invitations again. Looked around. Something wasn't lining up. My father stepped outside, scanning the entrance like I might appear at any second and fix everything simply by showing up. At 4:20, my mom called me. I didn't answer. She called again. Then, "Daniel." Voicemail. Again. And again. By 4:40, the crowd had grown restless. The polite patience had worn thin, replaced by confusion that was starting to edge toward embarrassment. And then, at 4:45, Melissa walked out. Calm, professional, holding a folder. She approached my mother directly. I wasn't there, but later I would hear exactly how she said it. Clear. Measured. Mrs. Mercer, she began. I need to let you know that the booking under Caroline Mercer was cancelled on March 14th. Silence. The kind that falls all at once. What? My mom said. The contract is no longer active, Melissa continued. We have another event scheduled this evening. Another event. Not theirs. Not mine. Gone. Just like that. My mom's face changed. Not slowly. Instantly. Cancelled? That's not possible, she said. I didn't cancel anything. Melissa didn't react. The confirmation was sent to the email on file, she said. You may want to check there. By 5, 200 guests were standing outside a venue that no longer belonged to them. No ceremony. No reception. No explanation that made sense. Inside, Savannah was still in her dress. And for the first time that day, nothing was centered around her anymore. Not in the way she expected. Because while all of this was unfolding in Charleston, I was already married. Hours earlier. Thousands of miles away. And for once, I wasn't missing from my own life. I had finally shown up for it. When the first wave of calls came in, it was already dark where I was. The ocean outside our villa had turned almost black, the surface catching only small pieces of moonlight, moving slowly like it had nowhere to be. Daniel was sitting beside me, barefoot, a glass of water in his hand, still in the same linen shirt he had worn during the ceremony. We hadn't turned our phones back on yet. Not during dinner. Not during the walk along the shoreline. Not when we sat in silence, letting the reality of what we had done settle in. For a few hours, the world had been exactly as small as we needed it to be. Just us. No expectations. No noise. No one asking for anything. At 9:12 p.m., I finally reached for my phone. I don't know what made me do it then. Maybe curiosity. Maybe readiness. Maybe just the quiet understanding that whatever was waiting, I could handle it now. The screen lit up instantly. Notifications didn't trickle in. They flooded. Missed calls. Messages. Voicemails stacking on top of each other so fast the screen struggled to keep up. I didn't open everything. I couldn't. But I saw enough. My mom's name repeated over and over. My dad. My aunt. Savannah. Even a few numbers I didn't recognize. People who had probably been standing in that parking lot, trying to make sense of something that no longer existed. I opened my mom's messages first. The early ones were confused. Where are you? People are waiting. Then sharper. Caroline, answer your phone. This is not funny. And then, anger. You canceled the venue? What have you done? The last message sat at the bottom of the thread. Short. Cold. Final. You've embarrassed this family beyond repair. I stared at it for a long time. Not because it hurt more than anything else she had said, but because it sounded so familiar. Not the words. The perspective. Everything was about the family. The image. The people watching. Not once did she ask if I was okay. If I was safe. If I was happy. Daniel leaned slightly closer. You don't have to answer tonight, he said. I nodded. Because for the first time I understood something I had never allowed myself to fully accept before. Urgency doesn't always mean importance. Just because someone demands a response doesn't mean they're entitled to one. I set the phone face down on the table. The screen glowed faintly through the wood for a second, then went dark. We sat there in silence again. But it felt different now. Not like something unfinished. Like something complete. I didn't feel guilt. That surprised me. I thought I would. At least a little. But what I felt instead was light, not happiness. Not relief in the dramatic sense. Just the absence of something that had been there for so long I forgot what it felt like without it. Pressure. Expectation. The constant pull to be available. Gone. The next call came at 3:08 a.m. I watched it ring twice before answering. My mother didn't say hello. Do you have any idea what you've done? She demanded, her voice raw, like she had been crying or yelling or both. I sat up slowly, the room still dark. Yes, I said quietly, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of her reaction. She didn't pause. Didn't ask how I was. Didn't ask where I was. 200 people, Caroline, my mother said, her voice shaking. 200 people standing there, looking at me like I'm a liar. I let the words settle. Not to absorb them. Just to hear them clearly. I never agreed to share the venue, I said. Oh, don't start that again, she snapped. This isn't about technicalities. This is about family. About showing up for each other. I sat there in the dim light, the ocean faintly audible beyond the glass doors. Showing up? I repeated softly. You told a vendor I had agreed to something I never consented to. You printed invitations with my name on them without asking me once. That's because you would have said no, she shot back. The honesty of that landed harder than anything else. Not denial. Not misunderstanding. Certainty. She knew. She had always known. And that didn't matter? I asked. You're my daughter, she said. Like that explained everything. We do what's best for the family. There it was again. That word. Family. Used like a reason. Used like a shield. Used like something that automatically overruled me. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not to calm down, but to stay steady. Do you know how much money I've given this family in the last 7 years? I asked. Silence. Just a second. Then, sharper, this is not the time to bring up money. It's exactly the time, I said. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, sitting upright now. $76,920. The number didn't shake. It didn't rise. It just existed. I tracked every transfer, I continued. Every request. Every message. I have all of it. You don't get to throw that in my face, she said, but her voice had changed. Lower. Less certain. I'm not throwing anything, I said. I'm telling you what it cost me to keep being the person you expected me to be. No response. For a few seconds, there was only breathing on the other end. Heavy. Uneven. You've changed, she said finally. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't praise. It was confusion. Yes, I said. Another pause. Then, quieter, almost like she didn't recognize her own words. I don't understand you anymore. I looked out toward the dark horizon. You never really tried to, I said gently. That one didn't come from anger. It came from clarity. She didn't argue, didn't correct me, and somehow, that silence said more than anything else she could have. I can't do this right now, she said abruptly, and then the line went dead. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I just sat there, phone still in my hand, the room quiet again. Daniel stirred beside me, half awake. You okay? He murmured. I looked at him, then at the ring on my finger, then back out at the ocean. Yeah, I said. And this time, it wasn't something I was trying to believe. It was something I finally knew. The next morning, I didn't rush to fix anything. That was new. For most of my life, conflict meant movement, calls, explanations, damage control. I had been trained to respond quickly, to smooth things over before discomfort had time to settle. But this time, I let it sit. The sunlight came in slow through the curtains, soft and gold, touching everything without urgency. Daniel was already awake, leaning against the headboard, scrolling through something quietly. You don't look stressed, he said. I'm not, I replied, and even as I said it, I realized it was true. Not because nothing had happened, but because for once, I wasn't trying to manage everyone else's reaction to it. I made coffee, sat out on the deck, watched the water move in long, steady lines. And then, after a while, I opened my laptop, not to defend myself, not to argue, just to place something where it could no longer be ignored. The family group chat had 23 members. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had watched me give for years and never asked where it came from. I stared at the message box for a moment. Then I started typing. I know yesterday was confusing and upsetting for a lot of people. Before anyone decides what they think about what I did, I'm asking you to look at something. Attached is a record of every financial contribution I've made to this family over the past 7 years. Every transfer, every receipt, every request. The total is $76,920. I paused, then added one more line. This isn't about blame. It's about clarity. I attached the file, 14 pages, organized, documented, undeniable, and then I hit send. I didn't wait, didn't watch for replies. I closed the laptop and went back outside. Time passed differently after that, slower, quieter, but underneath it, something was shifting. I could feel it even without looking. Because truth does that. Once it's out, it doesn't need to argue. It just stays. Hours later, I checked. Not immediately. Not compulsively. Just once. Read receipts had filled the screen. One after another. Seen. 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 But no one had replied yet. No defense. No denial. No attempt to rewrite what was right there in front of them. Just silence. And in that silence, something settled in me. For years, I had been the one explaining, justifying, making things make sense for other people. This time I didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. Daniel stepped out beside me, resting his arm lightly against mine. "Anything?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. He nodded. "They'll respond," he said, "one way or another." I know. But for the first time, I wasn't waiting for their reaction to decide how I felt. That part was already done. Because this wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about no longer carrying something that was never mine alone to hold. And that was already enough. The responses didn't come all at once. They came in pieces. Careful, uneven. My Aunt Linda was the first. Caroline, I had no idea. Then my Uncle Mark, "I'm sorry, this isn't right." I read that twice. Because it was the first time anyone had apologized to me without adding a but. Then my mother, "You're airing private family matters. This is inappropriate." Not denial. Just discomfort that the truth was visible. Savannah's mother followed. "Reducing everything to money is disgusting." I sat with that word. Because the money wasn't the problem. It was the pattern. And the moment it was documented clearly, calmly, it became harder to ignore. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because the private messages started coming in. I didn't realize. This makes sense now. "I'm really sorry." Not loud. But real. By the next day, 3 people had left the group chat. No explanation. Just absence. Savannah deleted the invitation post. But it didn't matter. People had already seen it. Daniel got a call from Lucas that evening. "I didn't know," he said. "I thought you agreed." There was a pause. I think I've been told a version that wasn't complete. After the call, I sat quietly. Because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was a pattern, and once it's seen clearly, it doesn't go back to being invisible. The fallout didn't explode. It settled. Slowly. Over the next few days, everything grew quieter. Not fixed. Just still. Savannah disappeared from social media. No posts, no stories. My mother didn't call again. And for the first time, her silence didn't feel like something I needed to solve. It felt like space I didn't have to fill. Daniel and I spent our last morning in the Maldives walking along the shoreline. No phones, no updates, just the sound of the water and the soft pull of the tide. We didn't go over what happened. We didn't analyze every reaction. Because once something becomes clear, you don't need to keep proving it to yourself. At one point, he glanced at me and said, "I'm proud of you." Simple. No emphasis. Like it was already understood. I looked at him for a second, then out at the horizon. Not searching. Just noticing. "I didn't think it would feel like this," I said. "How does it feel?" I thought about it. "Quiet," I answered. "Not empty. Not lonely. Just steady." Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for what came next. I wasn't preparing to explain myself. I wasn't adjusting to keep everything from breaking. I had stepped out of something that never made space for me, and I didn't feel lost. I felt like I had finally stopped leaving myself behind. We landed back in Charleston on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Same airport, same city, but everything felt rearranged. Not outside. Inside. The apartment looked exactly the way we left it, Daniel's coffee mug in the sink, a stack of unopened mail on the counter, the small plant by the window somehow still alive. Normal. Almost too normal. I set my bag down and stood there for a second, letting it all catch up to me. Not the chaos, not the messages, just the shift. That evening, I opened my laptop. Not to reread the group chat, not to check who had said what. I opened a blank document. And at the top, I wrote 2 words. My boundaries. Not rules for them, standards for me. Daniel looked over my shoulder. "Feels different?" he asked. I nodded. Yeah. And it did. Because this time I wasn't writing something to be approved. I was writing something to be lived. Some of you listening know exactly what that moment feels like, the quiet after everything breaks open, when you finally decide what stays and what doesn't. If this story stayed with you in any way, stay where you are understood. This space was built for you.